Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today, my name is Ryan Feigenbaum. I'm the developer advocate here at GrowthBook, and I'm going to show you some of the features coming out in 3.4. I'm from Cincinnati. We just had a record snowfall. So these are some of the images up are just some of the images of our city. We're digging ourselves out right now. But when you work from home, it's not that much of an issue. So 3.4 is coming out. I wanted to start, though, by just calling out a big feature from our last release. And that is, this is the Slido link. If you want to go and put in any questions, you go slido.com and then you can put in this number. There's also a link in chat. Sorry, so the one I wanted to call out was multi-armed bandits. So this came out in 3.3. Multi-armed bandits is a really cool experimentation strategy where we automatically reallocate traffic to winning variants while the experiment is running. We have lots of documentation and resources on how to use this. But what I'm curious to know is, has anyone in the chat, anyone here used this yet? What do you think about it? And if you haven't used it, why not? If you could let us know, that would be really interesting. But this is a really cool feature, and I encourage you all to check this out. But let's get into 3.4. And so something to know about how we do our releases is that if you're on our cloud, whenever a feature is ready for production, you get it immediately. So all of these features you'll already have if you are on cloud. And then when our release comes out, which will be next week, that's when people who are self-hosted and they're pulling down the Docker image will get those officially. So that's how things work. So a lot of these you might already have, but this is calling out in case you missed it. All right, so the first one here is shareable reports. So imagine this scenario where you check in on your experiment. It looks good. There's lots of data coming in. You look at the health tab. There's no SRM. There's no multiple exposures. You look at the variant of something that you're testing out. It shows some uplift. And not only does it show some uplift, it shows this significant uplift, both statistically, but also this could be some huge revenue boost for your business. And so you're excited and you want to share these results out. But you have some members of your team who aren't in GrowthBook. What do you do? So we have a new ability to do shareable reports where you can share data to anyone. Let me show you here. We'll go into experiments and I'll just use our sample data, but we have this ability, even while this experiment is running, you can click up here and go to share experiment. And so we have the ability to only share it to organization members, but you can also just get a link, and this link is available to anyone. So what I can do is copy the link, and now I will open an incognito window and open the report. And so here, anyone could access this and see it. And this gives a kind of just interactive report of what the experiment was. So this is how it's set up, but then they can also click over onto results and then interact a little bit with the data to get details and see what's going on here, which is really cool. Another option here is to create actually a whole custom report. And when you do this, then you can edit the analysis. So you can change dimension, you can change metrics, you can change all kinds of things about this to really just call out what you want to call out. So for instance, if you wanted to remove one of the variations from your experiment and then only share that, you can easily customize this to however you need it. And so then you can share this out. And again, there's lots of different permissions, so you can really fine tune that. So this is a really exciting new feature that we just released, which we're going to build on, but it makes sharing those insights to your team much easier. This could also be useful for if you have an agency and you're running reports for lots of different clients. It makes it easy to share those reports out to whoever you need to. All right. The next one that I'm going to talk about is custom fields. So this is a new feature that came out, and it gives you the ability to add a custom field to the feature or experiment UI. So what I want to do is jump on back over to GrowthBook. I'll show you this. So this is down in settings, custom fields. And so you can see now that there is a custom feature fields for the feature or for the experiment. And so I can add a custom field here. And so there's lots of different types. So let's see, for a custom feature, maybe you want to give a GitHub link, perhaps. So you could say, should link to a GitHub issue. It's a URL. You can limit it to which project you want. You can put in a placeholder. You can put in a description. So link to GitHub issue. You can have it required or not. I'll save that. And then for custom field, experiment fields, let's add a custom one here. Let's do something like maybe multi-select, and you could do something here, which region this applies to. So this is more descriptive. It's not limiting the experiment, but you could have something like EU, North America, South America, Asia, however you want to do that. We'll save. So now these custom feature fields are set up. And if I go into features and add a feature, you can see now that this custom field is part of the feature creation setup. So it makes it really cool. You can do some really nice things here to make that process really fit your organization's needs. And then again, if I do a new experiment, I can come down and you see now I have this region select. So I can select which regions that this is going to apply to, which makes it, again, really nice for fitting your organization's needs. So this is custom fields. There's a lot you can do with that. If you have some ideas about that, let us know in the chat what you think you might use this for. But there's a lot of cool possibilities, I think, here. All right, so our next one here that we are going to do, let me switch back on over to our slides, are guardrail notifications. So this builds on a feature that's already present or has already been present in GrowthBook for a little while, but it's the ability to set up automatic notifications for your experiment when it reaches certain thresholds. So this is done by way of a webhook. So if you come down here to webhooks, so I have this one set up right now. And so this is the experiment Slack webhook that I set up. So basically what this does is when that threshold is hit for an experiment, it'll automatically pipe that into Slack for me. And I'm going to show you exactly how this works, but I'll click in here. It doesn't just have to be Slack. It can be, you can hit any endpoint that you want, but we have one pre-configured for Slack and for Discord, which makes things a lot easier. And the docs here are really helpful in terms of understanding how this works. So this is under webhooks and event webhooks, and then you can look and check out what this does and how it works up here. But let me just show you how it works. That's the best way to see this. So to mock this, I need to do a few things, but I'll show you how it works. What I'm going to do is copy this experiment. So I will do duplicate. And the big difference, I guess I didn't specify with Guardrail, is that before the notifications would only happen for your goal metrics, but now you can set it up. It'll also trigger on your Guardrail metrics. So that means that if you have something set up like latency, page load, support tickets, whatever those sorts of things that aren't the kind of main reason that you're running the experiment, but things that might break, you can set up a automatic notification for that. So all this can remain the same. Start this, save. It already exists, that's fine. I'm going to start this. And then what I need to do here, and let me actually, so I set this bot up to go into my personal, just my direct message in Slack. And so that's cool. You could set this up just to ping you if you just want to do that. And the only thing I need to do here is change the date. Where? All right. So there's a lot of different metrics running here, but so this is what it would look like is that I have this bot called Metric Watch. And because these metrics reached a chance to win or lose, they were piped into my Slack. So this is a really cool way to do these custom notifications in Slack or whatever kind of infrastructure you want to set up. All right, so let's move to the next feature. And if you have any questions about any of these, put these in the chat. We have simulation and archetypes. So these are really cool features, and it allows you, so as if you, we've seen our users do this, but you'll have really complicated feature flag rules or experiment rules where it becomes increasingly difficult to predict if a user will be included or where they'll be included in a set of rules. And so simulation and archetypes is meant to make that easier. I will show you this in GrowthBook. We come to features, and I have this complex feature set up here. So this is a feature flag, but I have, let's see, I think six different rules of varying complexity. And so it becomes difficult now to figure out which user, if a user has certain properties, are they going to be included? And so what we have down here is this simulation rule where you can put in a user's ID, for instance, and it'll show you, okay, they're in the rabbit hole experiment. That's where they're matched. And it'll give the reasons why certain rules have been skipped, as well as the different kind of results here, which is really nice to debug, to predict, to find out what's going on. So you can set up, try out any of your different attributes in here and get the results instantly of where that user would be placed. What you can imagine though is, let's say you have a saved group where there's kind of complex attributes. You might have device type, browser, country, the campaign, all that stuff, and you want to save it together. That's where archetypes come in. So we have an archetype here called beta users. And you can see that this means that the device type is of one kind. There's this UTM campaign. There's that they're not a beta user. They're in the country AR, and then there is boss is false. So you can save all those and as an archetype here, and that will tell you exactly what the feature flag evaluates to without having to put those in every time. So this makes it very easy, again, to know which users are going to be included where, so you don't need to try to parse complex feature rules. So that's now live and easy to set up for any features that you need to. And once you set up an archetype, you can use it across different experiments and feature flags. All right, one last one to show you today, and that is a really, I think, exciting one, probably the most exciting of these, and that is experiment templates. Experiment templates, as the name suggests, is a way to set up basically a template for an experiment, all the kind of different values and stuff, and then allow your entire team to use that template for new experiments. So let's jump in and take a look at that. So you go to experiments, and now there's a new tab here called templates. And so you can create a template. So we click create template. And let's say you're doing e-commerce and you do a lot of experiments on your checkout flow. So this might be the checkout flow template. And you can limit it to different projects. So I'll just keep it on sample data. You can include a description. You could include a hypothesis if you wanted this to be included on, on every experiment. And then you can also add tags, of course. Then you can define if you want, for instance, maybe only 90% of traffic to be included for experiments as the default. You can select that. And then with targeting, if you wanted to set up some specific kind of targeting, like maybe you only want to choose users who are in China, you could do that. And this will apply to every experiment that's set up with this template. And then finally, which I think is probably one of the most useful ones, is you can choose all of your metrics that you want to define for this experiment. So we have here, we can choose some different goal metrics. We can choose some different guardrail metrics. I'm just doing this randomly, but you get the idea. There's also lots of different advanced features that you could choose for the template, but I'm going to save this. And so now we have this checkout flow template. And then when I go to experiments and I click add and create a new experiment, I can now choose the checkout flow experiment. And you can see here, for instance, it added in those tags. There also, you can override these on a case-by-case basis. So I could just put my experiment name here. This is that custom field we set up earlier. I can go ahead and you can see then that like the traffic for that template was brought in. So it's only targeting 90% of users. And then if I continue, you can see then the targeting was also brought in. And Of course, those metrics that we talked to, or that I showed you earlier that we included will also be part of this experiment. So this makes it very easy to ensure consistency across your team for experiment templates. So everyone kind of is starting from the same base, but also it's going to cut down the time of having to set that up every experiment. It might have taken 20 minutes, should now only take 5 minutes. So it makes setting up experiments and getting going much easier. So those are the big features that are coming out in 3.4. We will have our release announcements and documentation and all that stuff coming. But yeah, ask us any questions you want to in chat.
Thanks, Ryan. That was really awesome. I think there was maybe even one demo that I haven't seen before, so that's really cool. What we're going to do is proceed to answering any questions for part of the office hours part of our webinar. But first, I'd like to see if anyone here who's attending has any questions. And if you like, we can do a couple things, which is unmute you so you can ask it like here, or what we can do if people are shy today, we can go to the pre-submitted questions. But definitely, if you'd like to ask any question, scan that QR code and then just join us there. We already have about 11 questions. So yeah, let's first open it up to the room. Anyone, I think I saw a hand up earlier, and I think this is a great time to get that question answered. So anyone interested in asking a question live? I'm not currently seeing any reactions. So, okay, cool. With that, I think we can also share this link. Ryan, do you want to do that, or would you like me
to share the
Yeah,
Slido link?
There's another
Or,
Slido link that lets us all see the questions. I can share that window too
oh
if you
yeah,
like.
you mean yeah, I can put that up.
There's a few that are grouped. I'm happy to take them together too.
Yeah,
Kathy, is this the page you mean?
Yeah, I think we can work with that. So yeah, this is great. So Luke, would you like to just go ahead and answer the ones that are grouped?
Yeah.
Just did see it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. These first two are pretty related and they're tricky ones, but I can't stop my stakeholders from peaking. Can I stop results from showing until they hit significance? And also, when is the right time to conclude a test to determine the winner? Too often we have tests which keep flip-flopping. I think these are related in the sense that if the test keeps going back and forth, if you stop it too early by peaking, you might make the wrong decision because something going back and forth indicates that it hasn't really collected enough data yet to make a final conclusion. I'm happy to go on about this for a long time, but to keep my time a little bit shorter, I think in GrowthBook right now, there's, I think, one main tool for the first option, which is at the metric level, you can determine how many kind of conversions for a binomial metric or like the total revenue that you need to see in a variation before you show any kind of results. This is a setting that was, I think we call it like minimum metric total in a lot of the metric settings. And in this way, you can ensure that at least when there's very little data, that people don't get too excited. That's the main facility that we currently have in GrowthBook for this request. We're also working on features to set a minimum experiment duration, since that tends to be a better way than just don't show until it hits significance. Because if you don't show results until it hits significance, you might still have some peaking and false positive issues. And so it's better to run for a fixed period of time. Also, because most of us are working with kind of web-based traffic, there's periodicity to this traffic. Mondays and Sundays are different. And so you want to make sure you collect across all of that. In that regard, we're working on features to help set a minimum experiment duration. That's coming pretty soon. I believe it should be in the next release, and we're going to follow on from that, which will also help set rules for your stakeholders around when they should be making decisions or not be making decisions based on some data constraints. That's a great question. Tough one that we're always trying to solve and help folks that are interested in setting up their teams' experimentation programs, and in particular, set up their own GrowthBook to solve those issues. Merritt says, I think Merritt's suggestion in chat about using the So You Think You Can Test game is a good one too. That's a great tool. The next question here I wanted to look at was a couple people had voted up earlier, which is just around freezing reports. I don't think there's anything you need to do to freeze a report necessarily. Once you stop an experiment, if you have like auto updates running, that's the top one. That's at the very top of your screen, Ryan. Or I can share mine though if you want me to, by the way, just to, but in any case, there's no need to do anything necessarily to freeze reports. Once you stop sharing, once you stop refreshing the results, they're stored there in perpetuity. So they shouldn't change. If an experiment is stopped, it won't auto refresh the results. So they should always be there when you come back to it later. Worst case, if you're concerned about something running and you want to persist a version of results for some reason, you can create one of those shareable or custom reports that Ryan showed in this demo. And that kind of lives on its own standalone kind of object with its own link and whatnot. And those will definitely never change, even if somebody changes something about the experiment configuration. Those kind of stay fixed unless you rerun the analysis or something like that. There's a few good kind of feature requests in here. I'm not sure there's a ton to discuss about them. The adding notes to phases to mark them as unusable for reporting purposes, one, which is, that's a great suggestion. I know a lot of time people have an old phase that was just a test or a demo, or something was broken when you were launching and you need to restart a test and you want to make sure people only use the latest phase or certain phase. This is a great suggestion. We should definitely allow you to have that kind of phase level metadata to inform stakeholders about what happened there. That's definitely both on our radar and a good suggestion. I will file a GitHub issue to make sure it's tracked after this. All right, there's a few questions here. There's a few about bandits I wanted to cover because there's two of them in here and we demoed them today. One of them is the team working on contextual bandits? Do we have a rough ETA? And what's the best way to transition from traditional A/B tests to bandits in GrowthBook? Contextual bandits are really valuable. We understand their use case. For those who don't know, a contextual bandit is basically the ability to not only have variations reallocate traffic based on how they're doing within the context of like for all users, say put 75% in one variation and 25% in the other because A seems to be doing better than B, but specifically to have it personalize the recommendation. So it's a kind of like lightweight recommendation algorithm in a sense, where you can say for users inside the United States, we want this split of traffic. For users elsewhere, we want this split of traffic, or any kind of dimension. That's what a contextual bandit is. We are not actively working on contextual bandits per se, but we are working on some of the precursors for contextual bandits, which require tighter linkages between the attributes that you set in your SDK and the dimensions that exist in your data warehouse. A little bit of inside baseball there, but we're working on some of the prerequisites for it. So because of that, we don't have an explicit ETA, but we're definitely working towards it. It's definitely on our radar. As for how to transition, I personally don't view it as a transition between from traditional to bandits. I think they're complementary. I think the biggest advantage of bandits is when you have a lot of variations and you maybe care a little bit less about learning which one is the best to understand your user behavior and update your beliefs about how your customers behave. And when you just want to pick something, a bunch of options that don't have clear kind of links to long-term user behavior. So I view them as complementary. However, getting started with bandits, I think right now, and there's a question about this in chat, right now we have our bandits work in a way where they ensure your users get consistent experiences over time when they return. So this requires some pre-work, including setting up sticky bucketing. So I would say the two main ones that are valuable to getting started with bandits are ensuring that you have those kind of prerequisites in place in our docs, but also making sure you have key metrics that are going to be easily movable in a short period of time. If you have some kind of long-term outcome, maybe even if it's like a sign up for a subscription, but that happens like weeks or days after some kind of experiment you're trying to run, that's not going to be the right kind of metric for a bandit. So making sure you have metrics set up that are tied to the immediate kind of experiment so that the bandit can get that feedback and begin updating more quickly. I'll use this to talk about real world examples of companies using bandits, which is right above this list here. We have several. We don't have any kind of like case studies that we can share with folks at this moment, but a lot of people are using them. We're tracking kind of interest and what people are actually running. And most of them so far, and including the ones that we've run ourselves, are around website optimization, making sure that you're getting people into the right flows that you want to with the right language and right page layout and design. Those are both what we've run ourselves, as well as what we're seeing our early adopters jumping into and getting started with. Copy all rule. Yeah. So that's it on Bandits. Thanks for your questions there. Yeah, there's a few other ones here that are good kind of feature requests. Okay.
Luke, can one thing I'll just call out with the copy all rules in order from one environment to the next. We do have a new feature coming out as well that we didn't highlight that gives much more better API endpoint for doing this. So this is something I'll put the link in the chat, but it does allow you to very easily copy one environment to the next. So it might fit the bill there. And this is useful if, for instance, you wanted to create a new environment that's a carbon copy of another for the purposes of testing or something. And so it becomes a lot easier, but it is an API interaction.
Yeah. I think this makes sense as well in general. It's definitely like a pattern that makes sense. I think we should think about supporting it explicitly in the UI as well. But yeah, there's some improved API endpoints. Before I get into there's some stickier ones while we're doing some kind of housekeeping. If you want to scroll down a bit, there's a question about using SQL Distinct in fact tables in 3.4. I think this is in 3.4. I know that we built it right there as a possibility to use SQL Distinct. So I'm pretty confident that for pro and enterprise users, we've included count distinct in 3.4. So this would be the ability to say, I know one customer that we have wanted this because they wanted to track how many unique podcasts a user listened to. And so in that regard, you need to count the distinct like podcast IDs in a table of listens or whatnot. And so we've added count distinct to be able to handle that. So yeah, count distinct. I know it's been a popular feature request. It should be live and it should be in the release, but I want to confirm that since it wasn't in the demo earlier. I just want to make sure I'm not, all my T's are crossed, my I's are dotted. But if not, it's coming very soon. It's definitely live It's just a matter of whether how exactly we launch it. I would say there's a couple call outs. One is that a lot of the times count distinct is more expensive computationally than other approaches. Because of that, we use a hyperlog approximation. That's just a method name. I have no idea how it actually works, but it's some magic to basically take a sketch of your IDs in that column, reduce it down to a simple object so that it's easier to reaggregate and use. So it is an approximation, but it will be much closer than, say, just using count and hoping that there aren't a lot of duplicates. And it will scale to large data sets. And that's the main reason we went with that approach. Great. Let's see. Any other questions here that we should cover? Okay. How would you organize, summarize, and present all the A/B experiment metadata that you've run over the year? This is a really good question. Right now in GrowthBook, there is a tool on the dashboard. So if you go to your management section and you go into the dashboard, there is this experiment impact section. And what this does is it does some back of the envelope math to try to estimate kind of the overall impact of the variation winners that you've selected, as well as the kind of opportunity cost savings by not launching experiments that turned out not to be improvements over the status quo. It also produces then a full list of these experiments within a certain date range on a certain metric within a project or another. And so that is a way to view everything, sort it by that scaled impact that it had, and take a look at across a quarter, a half, a year, how your experiments have done. It's a little unsatisfactory in that I know there's so many more questions people want to answer with their experiment metadata. So we're also aware of that. I think one of the best tools that we could build to provide more support there is better kind of filtering on the experiment list page. We're definitely aware of and building towards that, as well as the ability to export metadata so that you can do this analysis yourself, even if it's just in a spreadsheet or whether you want to write it out to a SQL table, write queries and whatnot, and join it to other metadata you might have in your data warehouse. So I would say we have a few tools for this right now in GrowthBook, but I think the name of the game for us would be to make it so much easier for everyone to export this data going forward. So I want to pause here. There's more questions. I want to take them, but I don't know, Ryan, is there anything you wanted to chime in and answer? If not, that's fine. I can keep going. Or anyone in chat have any more questions? Feel free to upvote any questions that we haven't answered yet so I can see them more easily on top. But if not, I'll just go through a few more. But let me know if there's any other questions. I'll just take a breather here, take a sip of water. My voice drones on. Give everyone a break. Okay. Seems like we got some people jumping in there and upvoting this question on setting metric level rules to avoid falsely hitting significance early. How can we best find the right threshold? This is a good question. The metric level setting I was talking about was a minimum metric total to ensure that your stakeholders or you yourselves aren't getting overexcited about results early. And all it does is ensure that there's a certain amount of data that's been collected. It doesn't really mess with the significance threshold or anything like that. It just prevents the results from being shown early on in an experiment. How do you pick the right level for something like that? That's a very good question. I will say we have a power calculator in alpha. It's very early release that is in GrowthBook, which can help you understand how much data you need to collect before you start showing results. We're working actively on improving that experience to make it more seamless, to reuse your existing data to help you learn automatically how long you need to run an experiment for. But I would say in the short term, the best solution is thinking about in the past, how much data would you feel confident in collecting before you were to show a result? Is it, if it's something that's in the past you've seen repeated experiments where you can show clear significance after just thousands of users, or do you require more than that? Using your experience, a little bit of trial and error, because everyone's data is different, everyone's needs are different, and using that to set your thresholds for your metrics, minimum metric total before you display it to your stakeholders. But we know this is a complicated problem. And as I mentioned before, we're working on more kind of decision framework building to make it really easy for you to see what are your needed run times before you show results, or how much longer will you need to run this experiment to have a good chance of getting a clear answer. Those kinds of questions are the kinds that we're trying to actively help you answer.
I was going to see, you want me to show the metric page in GrowthBook so we can see what you're talking about in terms of the minimum metric totals and stuff.
Sure.
If it might be helpful, but
Yeah, there it is.
It's over here. So this is a total revenue metric, and so the minimum metric total here is 150. So this isn't going to show until that minimum is reached. Is that the idea?
That's the idea. Yeah. So it's comes out of this, that we want to build more tools around this, but it comes out of the idea that, especially for like click-through rates or like conversion rates or something, that if you only have 10 people signing up for something, even if you have thousands and thousands of users, that's not going to be enough data because it's a low signal kind of environment. And so this kind of setting is really valuable for those kinds of proportion binomial metrics where you have, say, like number of signups, like number of users that have signed up. And you want to make sure, hey, let's make sure we get at least like 100 signups before we start showing any kind of results. Now, whether 100 matters or is the right threshold, which is the question, depends a little bit on if it's at 50% conversion rate, then maybe 100 is enough. If it's a really tiny conversion rate, you have tons of users, maybe it's not enough. And so that depends a little bit on your own data and your own setup. So I would recommend, taking a look at what experiments in the past you've seen that were successful and using those to inform your settings going forward. All right. Okay. There's a few questions about reliably combining phases in analysis. I don't know if they're from the same person or not, because they're very similar. There isn't a current way to do this. The reason is that phases can be quite different from one another. And so combining them can lead to incorrect analyses in general. There may be some instances in which it is okay. Right now, the way to do this is to use a custom report where you manually move the date range to include the entire history of the experiment. That's the current best practice for doing this. I think the main use case for this is, say you launched in like beta users at first and then to everybody later, early adopters or something. You want to combine all of those results. I think in the medium term, the best way to do that would be to use custom report. As for why there's no scaled impact for average order value, I'll just say scaled impact, for those who don't know, is the ability to take your kind of lift in an experiment, say 1%, and then say, what is 1% in the context of how many users actually got exposed to this experiment? What is the total impact in number of signups? For example, if I had said, give everybody in this experiment the treatment variation, and what would be the total number of increase or decrease in signups that I would have observed because of this experiment. So it allows you to take an experiment and place it in the context of your overall traffic. It's a difference type that you can set on the experiment results page. And it can be really useful because an experiment that has a 1% lift on your homepage is actually much more impactful than an experiment nestled deep in some page or some widget that has a 1% impact, because so many more people are seeing that homepage experiment. So this kind of allows you to compare apples to apples in that regard. Yeah, right there. The reason that we don't have it for average order value is that it is scaled by user. And so there isn't really a scaling that would make sense for all orders. It seems like in a lot of those cases, you would care more about the scaled impact of like total revenue rather than scaled impact of average order value, because in that situation, you have a denominator, which isn't users. That's the short answer. There's a longer conversation there. There are maybe ways that you would want to scale that to some other unit, but it's harder for us to build that upfront because it's a little bit more of a bespoke setting. But that's why it doesn't currently exist. Great. There's also a question here: what is the best way to avoid multiple exposures? Multiple exposures is a tricky problem. It occurs when you have users that hit your experiment who end up with different variation assignments. So a user visits your page and it looks like in the data they've seen two different variations. This almost always happens when there is a disconnect between the identifier that is used for randomization and the identifier that is used on the analysis side. So this can happen in GA4 because, for example, so for some of our SDKs, we make it very easy to use a custom GrowthBook cookie ID because the GA4 ID doesn't load for quite a while. And so it can result in flickering if you use that GA4 ID. But to make it easy for your analysis side, we use that GA4 ID because it's linked to all of the other user behavior on your page. So this disconnect can cause multiple exposures, but has a lot of benefits. The unfortunate answer is that it can keep occurring. But if you want to work really hard to solve it, you can work on doing a little bit more identity management yourself. And I would say there's a pretty long article in our documentation, in our knowledge base, that covers why multiple exposures exists and what are the ways that you can do to mitigate it or understand it better in your setup. If you go to our docs and go down to the knowledge base on the bottom left, there's a whole article there about experiment issues, and it will cover this kind of much more in depth than I can do live in this session. Thanks for your questions. I have a few GitHub issues for really good features that we should definitely keep on our radar. I'll definitely track those. So I appreciate those questions. And thanks, everybody. Yeah, Kathy, I don't know if you want to wrap or if there's any other questions. I appreciate everyone's time.
No, I think you answered a lot of the interesting questions. If there's still some that haven't been answered, feel free to email us. But we are doing these more regularly, so look out for the registration, and then we'll see you guys soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.